What happens if you take a snowball quilt block and put a little border on it? You'll end up with a framed snowball, and today I'm going to show you how to do that. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, embroidery, and embroidery. So today I'm going to show you how to make the 5-inch version of a framed snowball quilt block. And it's called framed snowball because we can see this piece in the middle is traditionally called a snowball because it's a square or bigger piece that has triangles in the corners. So this block takes 3 fabrics. We're going to need a feature fabric, a light, and a dark. So pick out your fabrics and let's get started. So to make this block, you need a 3.5-inch square and some kind of feature fabric. And this is going to be the middle of the block. And I just have this big floral print, but this is a perfect time for fussy cutting, where you can cut to have a little picture in here, or if you wanted to do some little applique or embroidery, this is a perfect time for that. If you want to know more about fussy cutting, you can check out my other video that explains that. Then you're going to need 8 1.5-inch squares of either a light or dark fabric, and then 4 1.5 by 3.5-inch rectangles of the opposites. So I have light squares and dark rectangles, but you could have dark squares and light rectangles. You just want contrast between these two fabrics. You don't want them to be the same, and you do want to have a bit of contrast from your feature square. So once you have all these pieces ready, then we're going to begin making the piece. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take 4 of these little squares and then set the other 4 to one side for now. And we're going to draw on the back side of it a diagonal line. So a line from corner to corner. And so I'm just using a pencil for this. And so this is using a method called stitch and flip. So you've probably seen this in other shapes and other applications. And in this case, we're doing a technique that is sometimes called snowballing, which is why this is called a framed snowball block. Because often the name snowballing is used to when you have a square and you put a triangle on each corner. So what we're going to do for this now, we're going to line up on the corner one of our squares, so we can see it lines up on the corner, and then at the sewing machine we're going to sew directly on that line. And we will do that on all the corners. We'll put one on this corner, one on this corner, and we'll just make sure when you're lining it up that the diagonal line is going this way on the corner. Obviously, the diagonal line is not going into the corner, so when you start to sew, you kind of get to the edge and say, oh, what did I do? You want to orientate it this way on all of the corners. So I'm going to sew those on, and then I'll show you the next step. So now that I've stitched all 4 of those corners on, I'm going to trim away the corner beyond the stitching. And it's going to be around 1/4 inch. I'm just going to eyeball it because it doesn't have to be exact. And you can use scissors, you can use a rotary cutter, however you're comfortable. But because this is pretty small, I'm just going to use scissors. And I'm trimming off the corners. And now when I go press it, I will press these corners out, and I'm pressing the seams toward the corners, and then you'll be able to see I will have a nice square with triangles in each corner. So this is what it looks like when it's all nice and pressed. And these corners that we have, they're very tiny, so I am just going to discard those. But if you were doing this technique on a bigger piece, then you might want to use my triangle hack to turn these in half square triangles. Because these are so small, I won't bother. But if you were doing this on a 12-inch block, then it might be worthwhile to do. So you can always check out that video for how to do that. And then once we have this is the middle of the block. And then our rectangles are going to go around this at north, south, east, and west. And then our little squares that are left are going to go in the corners. And so this should look pretty familiar. We have 3 pieces across and 3 pieces down in a little grid, so we can join this just like we would make a 9-patch block. So we're going to join these three, so we'll end up with rows. And on these rows, I'm going to press the seams toward the darker fabric. So these seams will be pressed out, these seams will be pressed in, and even if you had your color switch so that this was light and this was dark, I would still press it in that direction, because that means in this seam, these seams will stay flat and this fabric will be pressed. So you don't want to press those seams back onto themselves unless you have to. So I'm going to join those into rows and then show you what it looks like. And we can see the block coming together. You can see that these seams should line up, and because we press them in opposite direction, when we're going to sew that, we should be able to feel with our fingers that the seam lines up, because these seams are just kind of nesting against each other. So I'm just going to stitch the top seam and the bottom seam, and then our block is done. So here's the finished block, and at this stage it's 5.5 inches, and we can see this little snowball in the middle has been framed, and that's where it gets its name from. So because this block is pretty small, you're going to want to have accurate 1/4 inch seam allowances. So if you're struggling with accurate seam allowances, I do have another video that gets some tips for how to make sure you have an accurate seam allowance. So you can find that in the other videos I've referenced. There's links to them below. And if you like this 5-inch block, I do have a whole collection of tutorials for 5-inch blocks. So you could use those to make a nice sampler quilt or use them in some other quilting project. So you can find those in my 5-inch block playlist, and you can also find them at my website, epidastudio.com.